Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. The combat system in Immortals Fenyx Rising is pretty simple in its core, but there are some things that are good to know, especially if you plan to play the game on harder difficulties. I'm not going to tell you what skills to get or how to precisely build your character, that's not what this video is all about. Instead, I'm going to explain how certain mechanics work and how to take the advantage in fights. Don't let the cartoony style and vibrant colors fool you, you'll be surprised how many encounters in this game will require some serious muscle memory. I'm really enjoying the game so far and I'm still working on the review, so stick around if you want to see that. Anyway, let's get straight to the tips. The defense meter on enemies is one of the most important mechanics in this game. Once you do enough stun damage, you will take the enemy out of the fight, allowing you to deal some free damage. It's a really similar mechanic like in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I was not surprised to see it in this game as well. Your heavy attacks with the axe will do stun damage to enemies and most of your abilities as well. By default, your light attacks with the sword and your bow are not dealing stun damage, but there are exceptions to this rule. To be more precise, you can find specific items that will have stun effects on them. For example, this bow has a stun damage effect, even though the majority of bows don't have it. When you actually manage to stun your enemy, your goal is to inflict as much damage as possible. You want to spam your sword attacks in these situations for a couple of reasons. When the enemy is stunned, you can't do any more stun damage to their defense meter, which means using your abilities while the enemy is stunned would be just a waste of resource because you will lose the potential stun damage that you could do. So hitting the enemy with your light attack combo is the best choice in this situation, and right after the enemy recovers, you can immediately start using any of your abilities that do stun damage and start filling that meter again. The idea is to avoid wasting your stun damage and your stamina. Keep that in mind in fights versus boss-like enemies and one-on-one fights versus elite NPCs. I think that's the best way to maximize your stun damage output. Unless you have a specific effect on some of your weapons, which will somehow contradict this rule, so keep your eyes open for that. But if the situation gets too messy and you have a lot more NPCs to worry about, this might not be the best option. And that brings us to the next tip: iframes on abilities. Most of the abilities that you can use in fights, if not all, will have iframes. If you're not familiar with the term, iframes will give you a brief period of invincibility. Every time you use one of your abilities, for example the hammer, you can't take any damage. You can use this to your advantage in many situations, for example if you're not able to dodge the attack and you want to avoid getting hit. Especially if it's a really strong one, like the special red attack that can be parried. Let's go back to the scenario I mentioned above, when you got your enemy stunned, but let's say you have a lot more enemies around you, which will usually be the case. If you want to avoid getting hit by surrounding enemies, you can't afford to spam your regular attacks, so using your abilities could be a better option in this situation. You will ignore all incoming ranged and melee attacks, and you'll still use the opportunity to deal some damage to the stunned enemy. All of this is highly situational, I guess, but it should give you a good idea of what I mean. And speaking about maximizing the stun damage you deal, here's another tip for a different situation. When you manage to dodge the attack right before it's going to hit you, the slow motion effect will trigger and you'll have a couple of seconds to do some damage. In those situations, I think the best option is to use your heavy attack with the axe and deal some free stun damage to whatever you're fighting. I can't stress enough the importance of dealing a lot of stun damage on the hard difficulty. And do take in mind that this is not extremely important when you're fighting a smaller amount of regular enemies, especially on lower difficulties. The next tip is pretty simple yet really effective. You will notice that enemies can actually hurt each other and you can use that to your advantage. It's especially useful if you want to avoid those annoying ranged attacks. The attack indicator will be your best friend in these situations. Try to position yourself in a straight line between the incoming attacks and the enemy you're fighting. Sometimes you don't even need to do anything, NPCs can be really clumsy and help you out unintentionally. Since I mentioned the attack indicator, there's only one important thing to keep in mind. When the icon changes, that's the exact moment when the projectile is fired. Don't get too paranoid and start dodging before that moment, otherwise you will waste your dodge and there is still a big chance for the attack to hit you. There are some really annoying ranged attacks in this game with ultra precise aimbot, which can be really hard to avoid. And those attack indicators won't always help you a lot, you can only see them if the attack is coming from behind you. Otherwise, you will have to keep your eyes open for what's going on in front of you. Speaking about that, try to be aware of your surroundings. If you have some rocks or some similar items to throw at your enemy, you will do a significant amount of stamina damage. Here's another good example. There are a lot of similar situations that can happen in the game, and you can be really creative in some fights. Now let's talk about the parry button for a bit. I know this is not a favorite mechanic in games for most people, because it usually requires you to have a good reflex. Once you learn the attack animations of the enemy, it can be really easy to pull it off. The time frame for the parry is kinda forgiving, and you won't need superhuman reflex to pull it off. If you do it a bit earlier, you won't trigger the perfect parry effect, but you won't take any damage either. You will just block the attack. This gives you enough space to try and perfect the timing. It's only really punishing if you do it late. I encourage you to try and learn this mechanic in the game because it's definitely worth it. Although a lot of enemies will frequently use special attacks that can be parried, but we already covered the way that you can counter those attacks. Fight fire with fire basically. The last thing I want to talk about are how combos and combo meters work. You have 4 hits in the sword combo and 3 hits in the axe combo. You probably noticed that you can go back and forth between sword and axe attacks in the same combo. You can basically combine them however you want. Here's one interesting thing about your combos. If you start attacking with your sword and you do 3 hits and then you press the X button, you will perform the final attack in the X combo. And same goes for the axe, but only this time you have to do 2 attacks with the axe and press the sword button to perform the final attack in the sword combo. I hope I didn't lose you there, but it's pretty simple actually. The last attack in the combo for the axe and the sword is called Power Strike Finisher. These attacks deal more damage than regular attacks in the combo, and I believe the Power Strike Finisher with the axe deals more stun damage. It's really cool that you can actually trigger the axe power finisher with the sword and vice versa. This is useful to know because you will find items that have specific effects that are related to your combos and combo meters. The combo meter is the thing that's on the right side of your screen. It goes up every time you hit something and it resets when you get hit. It basically rewards you for playing aggressively and not getting hit. That kind of playstyle is really hard actually, but it feels great when you actually manage to pull it off. All of your damage will increase after a certain point and you'll find perks on items that will affect your combo meter. The easiest way to start building your combo meter is to hit a few quick shots with your bow before you engage in a fight. Your combo meter will reset after just a few seconds of not hitting anything, which makes it really hard to sustain it. And that would be it for this video. Like I said in the beginning, the combat in Fenyx Rising is simple in its core, but it's not mindless by no means. It has just enough depth to keep it interesting throughout the game. Be sure to stick around if you want to check out my review for the game in a couple of days. If you enjoyed this video, pressing the thumbs up button would mean a lot. Don't forget to subscribe for more content and click on the bell icon so you don't miss any future uploads. Special thanks to my Patreons, and if you as well want to become one of them, all the links are in the description. Patreon is definitely the best place to directly support my work, and every contribution is highly appreciated. That would be all, and I'll see you in the next one.